Good? Okay. So, I get to talk to you tonight about school safety, and this is a really big deal for me because it's what I'm most passionate about outside of spreadsheets and budget. And so, we're going to talk tonight about Alice. And so, is anybody here familiar with Alice? Okay. All right. So, Alice is an options-based response to an active shooter event. And Alice is an acronym. And we'll get to that. Whoops. Dave. Okay. So Alice is all about preparation. And so we prepare well for natural disasters, but for a violent critical incident, we do not prepare so well. This is why we keep seeing so many casualties. The training we receive for all dangers become lifelong skills, which is what Alice is all about. We need to ensure the training will provide the necessary skills and cultivate a survival mindset. And that's from the Alice Institute. And there was a handful of us that actually went to the Alice Institute to become trained. And so I was one of them, Jana, Amanda, Jake. We had Don Mayotte from the city, as well as Roger Landry and all of our school resource officers. So we're all certified to be able to, as trainers, to be able to train our staff. So the purpose of Alice, it recognizes the need for an option-based response strategy to survive violent critical incidents. It identifies how Alice strategies work in our environment, and we practice the Alice strategies during hands-on training. A lockdown is not enough. I can't stress that enough. Multiple response options are needed. And so as an example, if you consider what a lockdown does, and that's what we're all accustomed to, right? We lock our building down, our classrooms are locked down, and the students are huddled, let's say, in a corner, and then there's an active shooter that walks by their classroom. They could possibly enter that classroom, and they're all sitting ducks. That's what we're doing right now. So Alice allows for some options. The statistics show, and this comes from the Alice Institute, 60% of incidents end before the police arrive. 52% of casualties in K-12 were in hallways or classrooms. 85% of K-12 incidents, the shooter was a student, a former teacher, or related to a person in the facility. There are 5 components of Alice. A stands for alert. L stands for lockdown. I stands for inform. C is counter. And E is evacuate. Alice is not linear and it's not progressive. So if you're in that, if you happen to be part of that event, you actually get to utilize one of these depending on what your circumstances are in the moment. So if there's an active shooter in wing A and you happen to be, on the other side of the building, if you choose to evacuate because you think that's your best bet for survival, you can choose to evacuate. Right now, we don't give that option. We tell our educators that we go into a lockdown, and that's what their option is. So as far as not linear and not progressive, they can choose any one of these responses depending on what their circumstances are. So alert is when the initial awareness is received, and that could be by a PA announcement. It could be gunshots and screaming and loud noise going on. It could be a text message, or we could use our handheld radios to get alerts out. We all know what a lockdown is, and we can barricade the door, spread out within the room. We can look for alternative routes, and then, of course, we dial 911 when it's safe to do so. Inform. It's passing on real-time information. It's a continuation of the alert component of Alice, and so that's what, where, when, who, and how. The methods are the same as what under the alert component, and that's PA systems, radios. We can use our cell phones. We can text message. Any form of communication. Counter. It's taking back control. It's allowing the person in that room or in that hallway to take back control. It's, of course, an age-appropriate response, and it's a personal choice which component of ALICE they choose to implement. Evacuate. So they must have the authority to leave the building. Right now, they don't. Right now, it's a lockdown. We have to give them authority to leave. They do not take their vehicles. There are no vehicles. It is evacuate and go to the rally points. The purpose is to remove as many targets. And then, as I just said, they do evacuate to that rally point. It's a duty. And so since Jefferson founded, I'm going to read this because I think this is pretty profound. Since Jefferson founded public education for the citizens of the United States, schools have been charged with the safety of children and their care, a duty to protect. Teachers and administrators have a responsibility to anticipate potential dangers and to take precautions to protect their students from those dangers. So there's policy we have on our books, policy EBCA, and that's the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan, of which many of you, and Jana, I brought yours with me, a copy of yours, but these emergency preparedness faculty and staff plans are done every year. They're updated every year. Admittedly, we have a lot of work to do in these to update these. What happens is that within our policy, EBCA, this will cover an active shooter so that we can actually add ALICE to our policy manual here, or to our preparedness SOP, if you want to call it. And then this policy is what covers the ALICE implementation. That's it. Any questions?
So I guess I'm a little confused. Is this a strategy? Is this a program of training that we would be having people take? Is this, does this come with, I mean, I don't really understand, I guess, what this is.
It is a training, and so like I said, there's a bunch of us that are trained to do that. And so in order to conduct that training, there's specific protocol that the Alice Institute would have us implement. And so it really is about A, informing you of the direction that we want to move in. B, we believe, and there's a whole lot of us here that believe in this philosophical approach, and it really is about best survival rates.
Okay. What is this philosophical approach in contrast to?
It's in contrast to what we're currently doing, and that's a lockdown approach. So the Alice Way allows for options. So if you're a teacher, you're going into lockdown, right? This will allow you to be able to make your own choice in the moment, whether or not you go into a lockdown, which is an option, whether or not you decide to evacuate, whether you decide that you want to counter and barricade your door and do it that way. It empowers the educator to really make decisions in the moment for themselves for what they think is best, their best survival rate in that moment. Right now, they don't have an option.
Okay, so in that case, that means that the principal change would be from asking educators to exclusively lock down to asking educators to make a judgment call in the moment, presumably consistent with training that they would receive between a lockdown, an evacuation, and some sort of counter to an active shooter.
I don't think you could have said that better. That's exactly it. So we do have some folks here that may, yeah. I think it's important that you hear from some of our building admin and possibly even Roger, if you want to come up and just speak, on behalf of the police department. Before they come up, though, I do want to tell you, we have developed this incredible relationship with our police department, and we're so on the same page as it relates to this and many other things. And that's quite remarkable, I think, for a school district and a police department to be able to do that. We're very lucky to have that relationship. So do you want to come up, Jake?
Okay. Couple quick questions. One, how often are we doing drills in the schools?
So there's legal requirements around the drills. They vary by age, but we have to have a minimum of, I believe, 2 lockdowns at the high school level per year. At the younger ages, I don't know if you know, Amanda, how many. And we have more fire drills every year.
The fire drills are connected to this or
Uh,
separate?
Separate.
Okay.
But those are the drills that we do by law every year.
And not to get into much detail, but what does it entail to do a drill in a case like this?
So if we're talking about Alice specifically,
Yeah.
I would follow the training guidelines, but we would first do this with staff, and they would practice barricading a room with what they've got available to them. They would practice, if I had to leave this space, could I? Is it a second story? Is it not safe for me to jump out the window? Are you able to do it? Can you get through that glass to do it if you needed to? What things are in the room to counter an attack? What can you grab to throw or protect yourself? And also, if you had to escape, we did drills up to and including, again, it was simulated using Nerf balls, but running down a hallway, a whole group of people, you'll see much less injury and fatality than you will if you're sitting in a room waiting. And I fear that without shifting policy and doing the training with teachers first, we'd be putting our kids in a place where they did exactly what we told them to do, and they're sitting ducks.
So our teachers are equipped with A, securing the room, B, knowing their options, what they're doing. Are the teachers also teaching the children what the response is, or is that something separate?
Yeah, so what I envision at the high school level, and it looks different at younger levels. So at the high school level, what I would envision is we train the teachers with the different options they have available, and we want them to be thinking about the spaces they work in and have some ideas about what their options are and what they could do, and what they could do safely. To give them the autonomy to be decision makers with whatever information they have. And then we would do drills with the kids. We would say, okay, today we're doing a barricade drill. And we would ask students literally to barricade the door in that classroom as practice, just so they know how to do that. We would talk to kids about if the safest thing for you to do is to go out that window right behind you in this room, which would be a pretty long fall on a hard surface, but it's better than being a sitting duck. How are you getting up to that window? How are you getting through that window, and how much you get down from that window? So teachers have those scenarios in mind, and we would incorporate that in our training. We're not going to smash windows, but it's good to know that if you break this window, behind it there's a screen that you're not going to be able to get through unless you've got something to cut it with, things of that nature.
And the last question is, what is the communication network in terms of informing the public and the parents, et cetera, when situation arises?
So different levels of communication. I know that we use tools, including Bright Arrow, which is a mass robotic-like messaging system. We can customize those messages, email, text, voice, and robotic voice, so we can broadcast that out to all of our own buildings. I know folks here have the ability to broadcast that out district-wide. We've used things, email, Twitter. Depending on the situation, we've actually printed things on half pages and had runners bring them to classrooms because that's the best way to make sure everyone's getting the same message if they can't check email and things like that. So we have a whole web of tools at our fingertips.
Thanks, Jake. Before we keep moving forward with questions, just so members who are new know, when you go to speak, make sure your mic is on the side here, and then you push this button. When you're done asking your question, you take it off because it can affect the sound for the people up here who are listening. So just make sure if you're not talking, your mic's not on, and then just raise your hand, and I will get to you as I see.
I guess I have two questions. The first is about the efficacy of our current lockdowns, and specifically, um, what I've heard described so far sounds fairly ineffectual. And I'm wondering if in the course of approaching these issues, if there's any thought being given to, um, I guess, making it more, making rooms more secure so that it's easier to make sure that if it's needed, that a room can be, locked down and someone can't get into it, rather than a description where we're talking about barricading a door and someone fairly easily getting through it. I guess that's my first question, is about whether there's anything being thought about in that respect.
Your first question about the efficacy of what we're currently doing, I think lockdowns do have their purpose, and we are regularly communicating. Don't want to bring it up, and I won't be long-winded, but last year we had an issue. LPD was working closely with us that there may be someone behind the school, behind the football field, who was carrying a weapon and actively threatening the school. So we went into a lockdown, but we also moved a bunch of students. So by way of our internal communications, it's not always just hide in the corner, but it is valuable for kids to know, all right, we're in this state of alert, so that lockdown still has its purpose. So, but I would agree with you that what happens next, if something terrible happens at our school, is something that we need to improve on. And as far as the rooms being more secure, we actually looked into a number of things. One nice thing about the Alice outfit is they don't endorse or sell materials. So they're not selling door stops, they're not selling chains, they're not selling doorknobs, and they will talk about some of the options, like door stops and things of that nature, but they also talk about how while you can do certain things to keep yourself in and safe, if someone gains access a different way, you have a problem, you can't get out. So there's so many variables to consider. What I like about Alice is it's a mindset, and even if you have to go to a rendezvous point, so for the high school, let's say, just for conversation purposes, we were going to the Colisée to rendezvous. If there's another threat on the way to the Colisée or at the Colisée, you use the same mindset to figure out what's next.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Um, so those of you who don't know me, I'm the sergeant of the Youth and Family Services at the Lewiston Police Department, and I was an SRO at the high school for probably about 8 years. Also a firearms instructor, and I just kind of give you a little heads up on what we've been doing as a police department. We've already been putting this in place for the last couple of years when we do our trainings at the schools. So we're teaching the officers that expect it's not going to be a lockdown with one person in the hallway anymore, that there's going to be students in the hallways trying to flee, evacuate. So that's kind of how some of the stuff we've been training at school. Jenna came in for one of our trainings. But the whole lockdown premise was, I don't know if you know it, devised on California drive-by shootings. And that was to keep people inside the school away from the threat outside. And that's what's become involved in our schools. And I know you guys have had lockdown for years, and I was one of the guys going to schools and teaching it, but I also have kids in the school, and I'll be quite honest with you, I told my kid, if you can get out and get away from it, that's what you need to do. Because to lay there, it's like shooting a goldfish in a bowl, if they get into that room. So whatever we can do to protect the teachers, it's a benefit to us and the students. And we don't endorse any instruments, but there's a lot of instruction on how to lock your doors, secure your doors, leave. And I think the most important part of this is the real-time information. If you can provide teachers real-time information, students real-time information as to where the threat is, that's what makes all this work. So when we talk about this, communications is probably one of the most instrumental parts of the ALICE training, along with the training. And feel free to ask me any questions you want.
First of all, I want to thank everyone for their efforts this evening. As a former principal of 2 districts who were Alice schools, it's a lot of work. It's good work. It's great work. It's a lot of work to get your staff members, your teachers, and your kiddos, on the same page in preparation for the worst possible day that they possibly could ever have in their lives. We know that on a monthly basis across America, everyone does a fire drill. We know that since 1959, there have been 0 lives lost to a fire drill. But we also know that since 1999, the infamous Columbine massacre, we've lost 141 kids to school shootings at 50 incidents. When we think about the concept of if or when, we need to be able to prepare for when. And if our administrators and our teachers and our kids are on the same page in terms of alerting, locking down, informing, countering, and evacuating, we have the opportunity to save lives. So let's look at, we've got 3 that we know of that come off the top of everyone's, and there's been far more than 3. Top of everyone's head, we look at Columbine, we look at Sandy Hook, and look at Parkland. 3 highly publicized, for the right reasons, incidents that took place. All 3, I think our SROs could probably speak to this, but all 3, if they were Alice schools, would have had minimal casualties. A hero of mine is Victoria Soto, and she was that young teacher at Sandy Hook who did what she was told to do. She herded her kids in a closet when there was an exit 3 feet from the classroom. And all it took was for a man whose name we won't mention to walk in and open up that door, and the unspeakable took place. Parkland was interesting. Not everyone did their job at Parkland, we know that. But we also know that because students were barricaded in classrooms, we know that the shooter never actually entered a classroom, but he was able to shoot through windows and shoot at kids while they were in corners in that classroom. And then when we look at Columbine, and we look at the lives that were lost there, probably the most infamous of all, that was the one that seemingly started it all, but it really didn't. If we look at what Alice could have done there for those kids who were already almost outside, that were herded back inside, we know a lot more now. And it's been since Columbine that our police forces have really started rethinking this. And you know this because you've done this, sir. It's time in Lewiston that we become very proactive, and that we empower our folks and we train our folks so that should that day ever come, that our kids get to go home that night. And as someone who's led a building on 2 occasions in this, I will tell you it's well worth the time and effort. And I think it's very important that our school committee is kept posted on how these efforts will move forward. I do know that we're going to Dallas this summer to learn more about Alice and learn more about what other schools have done to really perfect this. And I think it would be probably a good idea to keep our committee posted on a regular basis as to what our progress is. So again, thank you all for coming out this evening.
Are there any more questions? Are there any more comments? Okay, great.
So I'm Matt Vierling, the SRO at the high school. I work with Jake pretty close. I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware that for every 4 seconds that an active shooting is occurring, somebody's dying. I don't know how often you have, or if you have ever walked through the campus at Lewiston High School. I happen to be the only armed protector in that building. And if an active shooting were to occur at that high school, it could mean a lot of lives before I get there. So I want to just stress the importance that I think as times change and evil tends to grow bigger and evolve, we need to evolve with that trend so that we can be better protectors. So I would just leave you with that and tell you that I believe this training will certainly equip our schools at least in a more adequate means, give us resources and give control to staff that normally would not have control, and possibly buy time for the protectors to arrive. So I would leave that with you and hope that you have a great evening.
I actually do have a question myself. Maybe you could answer it. So for anybody, parents or anybody listening, about the communication piece, students, especially at the high school, have their own phones, and perhaps they may be texting their parents to say, I don't know, we're in lockdown, I don't know what's happening, I'm scared, teacher saying get near the closet, like, that stuff is happening. So what is the chain of information for parents? What should a parent do if their student is sending messages to that effect? And how can we calm the chaos? Like, how can we say to parents, like, that's wicked scary, but wait, or
So I think what I would envision happening would be that if we were placed in that horrible situation as a district, I would believe that we would have a unification location. That may very well be the rally point. It may not be, but it would. I would believe that that unification point would probably be named pretty quickly throughout. The resources we have available as far as the leadership goes in the district. So I would envision that that would be a location that parents would be immediately sent to await the news and or arrival of their child. That's what I would see as a possibility in that.
so Jake, you want to add to that? Because last year when this did happen where we didn't have to evacuate or any of those things, students were still inside. It wasn't an actual threat to the high school, but things that were happening behind the high school. Can you talk about how parents get alerted to that?
Yeah, so we do use our Bright Arrow system. I send numerous messages out, but I know that one of the things that we are looking to analyze is that message getting to everyone? And I always encourage parents to make sure we have accurate contact information, because when we use those systems, if we don't have your right phone number, your right email, you're not going to get them. I'd also add that if something comes up, something terrible, do not flood the campus. You're going to a threat, and you're blocking the way of these folks responding and eradicating any kind of threat to our school. So if that helps answer your question, it's not helpful to have another 1,000 people show up at a place where we're trying to gain control of a threat. Everybody wants to call. It is.
As a parent, I get that.
Yep.
So, but understanding that messaging will come when it's available, and
Yes.
letting parents know to listen for that. And I think you're absolutely right. Making sure that your contact information is the most up to date. You sign up for all those alerts. I get text messages, emails, and phone calls. So, making sure that parents are signed up for all those things is important.
And I think the two first things that are paramount to me: protect the kids in the school and communicate. And sometimes those two things cross over, but job one is making sure the kids are safe. If you have to wait for your text, I apologize, but I'm going to do everything I can in my power. I can guarantee you that, to keep the kids safe.
Is that what you were going to say, Todd?
No, but I saw Colin's hand go up, so he's gonna go.
Okay.
Yeah, this isn't a question for anybody. I'm grateful to all of you who are, focused on this and thinking about what we can do in the worst possible case scenario to minimize the damage. But I also think that it's just important for everyone to reflect on the fact that this doesn't happen in other countries, and I hope that that policymakers beyond this body can focus on the incredible trauma that kids are going through, not just when they're, actually confronted with these events, but when they're confronted with the daily fear of these events, and recognize that that folks have to do something. I think that the policy changes that might be able to prevent these kinds of things from happening and prevent you folks from having to spend your time thinking about the worst case scenario are beyond the purview of the school committee. But I do hope that folks will take that under consideration.
Mr. Potman?
Here I am. All right. Question to the gentleman in the uniforms. And this is addressing Mr. Verlin's concern that, the fact of the matter is, in a shooting, we're talking 4 seconds, and it happens quick, and you have the high school, how many? We have 1,000, 1,500. Yeah. Is it practical, in your professional opinions, to talk about the establishment of security teams inside the schools of trained professionals who may be teachers or otherwise that may want to take upon themselves something of this importance, given the fact that when you guys are there, there's one of you, the response is minutes out. Is this such a dynamic situation that do you feel that that's a discussion that should at least start? Any of the three of you? No, I'm thinking more the people inside the building who would take upon something like that. Yes.
So we have to have, there's going to be an exchange.
So I think the initial question was about having safety teams within the school, potentially arming teachers. There's some research around that. I don't have that in front of me right now, but I would share very openly that trained personnel is critical. I'm not in support of teachers carrying in our schools, and again, the research, in my opinion, supports that. I do think it's an important thing to at least have a discussion about, but there are lots of people that I don't think. How do you adequately train someone for that kind of situation with that kind of chaos? I rely on our professionals and their training. And Ms. Buffin, I know that you're a professional, that you've had training, but to think that someone would properly discharge a firearm in a school crisis situation is a really tough ask. And I don't feel confident in a security team within the building that are teaching staff who are not trained in this way, in my opinion, with experience and exposures to real trauma and real critical situations for them to be carrying in our school.
Okay, so that, we're going to move away from that conversation. That's not part of what the presentation was. It was about the ALICE training, so that's a bigger discussion that we're not going to have here tonight, but thank you. Ms. Hawk?
So, as a former school bus driver, I'm very aware of how important prevention is, so I'm really glad that we're looking at this. On a school bus, you have 1.5 minutes before that bus is completely engulfed in flame. I had multiple conversations with parents, well, why aren't there seat belts? They're running all over the place. I'm like, if I slam on the brakes and those seat belts lock up, it's going to take a lot longer than 1.5 minutes to cut every single seat belt and get every single kid off that bus. That's why the backs are so high and why we try very hard not to slam on the brakes. That's why we do the drills, and that's why I'm glad to hear that we're talking about the training of our teachers and running through this with the students, because the kids on my bus, because we'd been through the drills, they knew what the plan was. If something had happened, they knew what to do, and that gave them some level of security. So that we're talking about this ahead of time before it's happened here, before it's become a problem, really gives me a lot of, doesn't make me feel great, but makes it a little bit easier to think about this. So, thank you.
So to that note, I think it's really important that we recognize what the Lewiston Public Schools School Committee has done in terms of prevention. Tonight we're getting ready to name a social and emotional learning coordinator. And when we talk about allowing our students and our teachers, by the way, to have self-awareness and self-management, social awareness, responsible decision-making, and relationship building. Those things right there, those are real things. And those are real things that can help, move a potential offender away from that. And so it's my job to point out that the school committee has been very forward in their thinking, and very, very proud that this work, which is happening in isolated areas in our district, is now going to be district-wide. So as important as ALICE is, possibly more important would be keeping in mind that the social and emotional aspects of educating our kids is extremely important to the school committee. So just wanted to point that out.
All right. Anything else? I want to thank everyone for coming. Bobby, thank you for putting this together. For folks who have been through the training, thank you for coming and supporting again. I know that you came last time for the committee, but it's good for the new committee to hear this stuff. And that's a hard training. We saw like a little tiny piece of it, and it's gut wrenching. And even the conversation tonight is a little bit hard to deal with, but it is about prevention in all kinds of ways. So again, thank you very much, and we'll take a break until 6 o'clock. Well,
So
fine.
I
Okay,
equally
Bobby.
want to thank, what's that?
It's fine, okay.
I equally want to thank the school committee for really embracing this, where I'm very appreciative of that. I want to thank our police department and our building administrators for really supporting this, and I'm super excited to move forward with this. I think it's the right direction. Thank you.